Good day to everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Asian Evaluation Week. We are now in our fifth day and last day of our week-long conference. I hope you are all doing well and fine wherever you are. So I'm Mike, I'm your host, and I'm with the Independent Evaluation at ADB. Thank you for your interest to this session. So before I transfer to the moderator, let me just quickly remind our participants on some house rules and announcements, which actually have been played in the screen earlier. So if you have questions to our panelists, please use the Q&A button so the chat function will be disabled. So if you're in social media, please use the hashtag AEW2020. You may want to post your screenshot or your key takeaway or learning from this session. And please don't forget to tag us. Now, at the end of the webinar, please do answer a short survey. So this would help us designing future webinar or sessions of this nature. Also, a reminder to everyone that we are recording this session, and the presentation materials and the video recording will be made available in the AEW website. Now, I would like to promote this e-magazine that we produce. It's called Asian Evaluation Week, a retrospective, which celebrates 5 years of learning, sharing, and connection. So the e-magazine narrates how AEW was conceived and showcase yearly highlights through curated photos and stories from the men and women behind AEW. I hope you will check that out in the AEW website. Now, moving on to our webinar, session 30, Assessing Horizontal and Vertical City Growth, Geospatial Impact Evaluation. Now, our moderator for this session is Peter Sherrill Monport. So Peter is the Knowledge Management Officer at the Independent Evaluation Group at the World Bank, based in Washington, D.C. He's leading various IEG staff learning initiatives. So prior to joining IEG, Peter worked with the climate change practice and governance also at the World Bank, and also has been a university lecturer, journalist, and also a filmmaker. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Vienna, master's degree in international relations and communications from Universities of Essex and Salzburg. So let's all welcome Peter. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Michael and team. Good morning, good evening to the participants. Hello, and welcome also to our distinguished presenters today. We have with us from the Independent Evaluation Group of the World Bank Group, Victor Vergara, Maria Elena Pinglo, and Hiro Yuki Yokoi. And we have also with us Yonggun Wang, who is with the World Bank South Asia Urban Unit, and Swati Sachdeva, who is with the World Bank Urban Resilience and Land Global Practice. I will introduce them in more detail shortly before their respective interventions. Now, to set a bit of the context for today's session, most urban expansion in developing countries is characterized by rapid informal growth, thus increasing the number of people who live in slums, currently estimated at about over a billion. Most of this spatial growth is through low-density urban expansion, commonly known as sprawl, which takes place in the context of poorly regulated land use and land markets. This leads to even greater inequalities and inefficiencies. Thus, managing urban spatial growth well is crucial to reduce poverty and promote shared prosperity, as well as to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In this context, the evaluation we are looking at today and what will be discussed, managing urban spatial growth, is looking at the World Bank support to land administration, land planning, and land development. It is in draft stage, thus findings can't be shared yet. However, the presenters in today's session will discuss IG's evaluation approach to managing urban spatial growth, in which assessing horizontal and vertical city growth is an important aspect. They will also present two methodologies used to measure the impact of two land development urban transport corridors. And thank you. And yes, if you could please advance to the next slide, please, to the session takeaways. Thank you. So looking at the agenda and the session takeaways. So as mentioned, you will first hear in the first segment presentation, in the lead presentation from Victor Vergara and Maria Elena Pinglo about IHE's approach to the managing World Bank, managing urban spatial growth evaluation. Both Victor and Maria Elena are co-leading this evaluation. To provide background on them, Victor has over 30 years of experience in the urban sector. He is currently the senior evaluator for urban land and resilience in IHE. Prior to joining IHE, he has, among others, led World Bank global capacity building programs on urban development and municipal finance, urban lending operations in the East Asia Pacific region, and the Metropolitan Lab for Strategic Planning and Management. Maria Elena has over 15 years of financial and private sector experience, plus more than 10 years of experience evaluating World Bank Group development results, writing reviews, and assessing programs and strategies, among others. Prior to joining the World Bank, she was a lead financial analyst with Merrill Lynch in Lima, Peru. Immediately after the intervention of Victor and Maria Elena, Hiro Yokoi will talk about how geospatial impact evaluation is implemented in the case study of World Bank finance transport projects in Maputo and Mumbai, respectively. And this case study has been conducted as part of the Managing Urban Spatial Growth evaluation. Hiro is an IHE evaluation officer. He is currently engaged with various thematic evaluations, including on managing urban spatial growth. He is seconded from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, where he led numerous lending and technical assistance projects on transport, urban development, and disaster risk management. After these two presentations, we will have the first Q&A session. Will be opportunity to exchange and discuss your questions. And after that, we will hear from, in the next segment of today's session, we will hear from Yonggun Wang and Swati Sachdeva on the impact of urban upgrading in Kabul, Afghanistan. They will discuss how geospatial data can be an important tool to identify, analyze, and evaluate the impact of urban upgrading on horizontal and vertical growth in data-constrained and conflict-affected cities. This case study is particularly relevant as urban upgrading is one of the key building blocks of the evaluation that we are looking at. And after that, there will be another opportunity for question and answers, a question and answer session. And this will be then concluding our today's session. And now, before I hand over to Victor and Maria Elena, if, just to let you know, participants, please feel free to write anytime during the presentations your questions into the what you see down there is the Q&A section. You can type them in there. We keep note and then address them in the Q&A. You can do that anytime during the presentations. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Victor and Marlena for their first lead presentation of today's session. Victor and Maria Elena, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning and good evening to all the participants. I welcome you all to a presentation of IHE's approach to measure the impact of land development investment through urban transport and urban upgrading intervention. The agenda for this presentation aims at informing you about the importance of managing urban spatial growth and the elements that are necessary to measure the impact of urban spatial growth. I will cover point 1 and 2, and then I will pass it on to Victor, who will cover the purpose and framework of the evaluation and what specific aspects we need to be able to measure the impact. Next, please. So before going into this, I would like to ask you something about the city that you live, and please press in the poll if your city is, believe that your city is expanding or not, and just answer yes or no. everybody, please, you can click on the screen, and we'll give it a 30 seconds or so to get the results. And once you do that, if you responded yes, okay, so 96% just gives you a sense of the importance of this topic. And for those that responded yes, I would like to ask, what do you think is driving this growth? And you can just click what is your top reason for the drives the growth of the city where you live. Again, 20 seconds. And okay, so as you can see, most of you responded the increase in population. And actually, there's actually no right or wrong response. The responses are highly contextual, but the increase in population, in particular urban population, is indeed one of the critical reasons. And these increases are putting pressures on the uses of land and infrastructure services, and are transforming the cities. So, the importance of the importance can be seen in the next, in 2045, there's going to be a 2 billion increase of urban population. 50% will increase, and that will require about 1.2 million square kilometers of new urban built area. Good managed urban spatial growth is particularly relevant in Africa and Asia regions, which have the countries that are expected to grow the fastest. And most of the expansion will occur in developing countries. As an example, and go to next slide, please. There are two cities, Maputo and Mozambique. Maputo has increased double in its surface area since over 15 years, and Canton has tripled. So in addition to that, this growth has put pressure in the number of urban residents who live in the slums, principally in lower income cities. It is estimated that 880 million urban residents live in slum conditions compared to 792 million in the year 2000. So what do we need? How the cities expand? They have to grow, in the next slide, please. They have to grow horizontal or vertical. They need more floor space, either horizontally or vertically. And interventions in urban transport and urban upgrading shape land use and growth patterns. And if they are planned well, like in the city of Curitiba in Brazil, which is the picture that we depict here, they can help define the way the city develop and how inclusive the city is. And now pass it on to Victor.
Okay, that's Curitiba right there. It took a little bit to show. You can see the densities are articulated around the transport corridors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the evaluation that we're undertaking, and I'll be brief. We have an approach paper that's available online. We'll put the link up so you can actually read in detail how we have proposed to go about the evaluation, which will be out sometime in probably November of this year after the reviews take place. So the evaluation that we are undertaking, the purpose is to assess the relevance and and contribution of World Bank support, World Bank Group support to assist clients manage urban growth. And so as an evaluation, we're looking at the two classical entry points for an evaluation: relevance and effectiveness. And we're looking at the relevance of World Bank support to clients in managing urban spatial growth through in three areas: in land administration, land use planning, and what we have conceived to be land development. And land development we characterize as either land development through transport and land development through urban upgrading. And the effectiveness, we're assessing it in selected upstream and downstream World Bank interventions at the country and city level. Next slide, please. So we have constructed a framework for analyzing urban expansion. It is, I think, a robust framework. It is one that fits the Multilateral Development Bank agenda well. So that's also an important consideration for the framework. If it was built from scratch, we may build another framework. If we were in a university, perhaps, or in a city administration, but for the Multilateral Development Bank environment, this fits very well. And so we begin with land administration as the basis of all urban development, basically to develop and to facilitate the creation and the functioning of land markets. As we know, without functioning land markets, cities grow in informal ways, and and many problems are created. So the first premise is the creation of land markets that function well. From then we go on to, we focus on land use planning. Of course, other things matter, finance matters, and planning for resilience matters, but we have chosen to focus on land use planning. And these three factors contribute to the efficient and resilient land use. And in land use planning, fundamentally, it's the demarcation of land use for private and public uses. We then go on to land development. And as I said, we're looking at urban upgrading and urban transport. In urban upgrading, we're trying to see how integrated land use can be fostered. And in urban transport, how the integration of transport to land use. And ultimately getting to sustainable, efficient, and equitable urban spatial growth. So that's the general framework that we have developed and we're using. We have a theory of change associated with this framework. I won't go into great detail into the theory of change, but just to mention that we have, as any theory of change for evaluation, we're looking at inputs and we're looking at intermediate outcomes. We are not looking at impacts. It would be impossible to do so in the context of the framework of a reasonable framework and budget. But we are looking at outcomes. We look broadly at country and city levels, and we are looking at the ultimate outcomes are land use planning, land administration, and land development. I think that one important factor to consider is that the efficiency of land use is now part of the SDG 11. So this is a global agenda. The efficient growth of cities is not a local issue anymore. The consumption of land to make cities better is a global agenda, and it is part of SDG 11. And there's an indicator which is not perfect, but at least we have an indicator for land use, and it is part of the World Bank agenda because it refers to the reduction of poverty and the shared prosperity, and that being the ultimate impact. So let me now go on to a fundamental issue that we're addressing in the evaluation. For the next slide, please, which is the idea of project location. This may seem trivial, but we have found that this is a very important binding constraint to ensure that we can understand the impact of investments on urban growth. Until recently, maybe 5 or so years ago, perhaps a little longer, technology was not accessible to locate projects in a systematic way in large institutions like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank. And we used our frame of reference was the jurisdiction in which projects were taking place. So as an example, in Rwanda, if we were to have a project, a small project in a small neighborhood, and we only spoke about the project being located at the provincial level, we wouldn't really be, it wouldn't be a meaningless reference of project location. If we go to the district level, you know, over 600 square kilometers, it would be better, but still useless. The town would be more interesting, but still useless. Neighborhood would be better, but still useless. So we need coordinates. We need to know exactly where investments take place in order to understand how those investments affect urban growth. So that's the first point that we wanted to stress. The second point that we wanted to stress, and it's very much in line with the Alain Berthaud school of thought. You know, I actually worked with Alain 30 years ago in the urban unit in the bank. And the idea of making sure that economists and land use planners work together. And the common denominator of those two disciplines should be land prices. You know, you can't plan cities without looking at land markets. And the indicator of land markets are land prices. And so we want to understand how the pressure on development is affecting land prices, and how you know, infrastructure that needs to be put in cities can facilitate the development of land at prices that are accessible to everyone. So this has been a major aspect of our evaluation, and we will be stressing this a lot in the report that we are preparing. Without a clear understanding of land markets, urban development policies cannot respond to location and the nature of demand accurately. And furthermore, the prices, and I think that the text is not showing up here. There we go. You can click all of those. There are 3 bullets. But so fundamentally, this is a key point that we're driving in the evaluation, and a major contribution that we're making in the evaluation. Hopefully, it will be. It responds very much to the thinking of modern urban planning. That planning is not a physical phenomenon that is not linked to the economy and to the urban economy. Final aspect on land prices is that we are stressing the need of cost recovery, right? And cost recovery can take place by understanding how land prices increase, how you have fiscal revenue from property tax, and you could have mechanisms to extract part of the land value that is generated through infrastructure for public investments. The last point that we want to talk about is on urban transport. If you could switch the next slide, please. So here we see a very nice slide of a BRT, of the DART. The DART in Dar es Salaam, the Dar es Salaam Rapid Area Transit System. And you know, it is widely accepted that the urban transport infrastructure shapes cities. If you have good urban transport that is integrated into land use, you're going to have cities that are accessible, that are walkable. Most importantly, you will have cities that do not generate a demand for private transport in the form of motorized transport, be it motorcycles or automobiles, which is the nemesis of good urban growth. The bad example of, if I may say, to some extent, Europe and clearly North America has been this, that cities have been designed around the automobile and not people. And the way to get out of that paradigm is to build cities that have good transit, good public transit, that limit the need for private transit. So we have this integration of urban transport to land use. And if you can go to the next bullet, please. So we want to understand to what extent projects are integrating land use to transport, principally through transport-oriented development. this revolution in modern transport planning, which is actually a recognition that you cannot plan transport without planning land use. It's a basic premise, but it's now being manifested. So those are the points that I wanted to state. We'll put the link of the approach paper, and we can go on to the next session. Thank you very much. And so you have our contact information there. Thank you. So, Peter, we have a Q&A right now, I think.
Thanks very much, Victor and Malena. Actually, we would now go to Hero for his presentation, and then do the Q&A jointly after his intervention. Thanks, yes. Over to Hero, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much, Victor and Malena. Yeah, so my name is Hiro Kyokoi. I'm working at an independent evaluation group of the World Bank. And nice to meet you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So as Victor mentioned, the integration of land use planning and land development is crucially important for better managed urban city. But the evidence is very scarce. So we try to understand the effect of such an integrated manner through geospatial impact evaluation that assessed horizontal and vertical city growth in the 2 case study cities. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I have a 5 agenda, and one is about the causal chain of the typical urban transport project outcome. And the second is about evaluation questions of the geospatial impact evaluation. And the third is to provide you with the context of the projects. And then the fourth is about methods, how we could get the data, how we could, process the data, how we could analyze the data. And the last one is about results. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, for the causal chain, for the urban transport project, it is typical to observe its outcome through mobility improvement. And that mobility improvement is often evaluated through travel cost saving, travel time saving, etc. But as Victor mentioned, the improvement of urban transport has much more bigger role to shape city. So the eventual outcome of the urban transport project are the 3 different kind of densities by stimulating the behavior of the real estate development and by introducing different sets of policy instruments. And the different sets of the density means the horizontal density, vertical density, and articulated density. For the horizontal density, it's about the built-up area on the surface. And the vertical density is about the height of the built-up area. And the third one is about articulated density, which might be a new word for some of the people. But as you could recall the image of Curitiba in Brazil, there is a clearly concentration of the higher building along the corridor. That is articulated density. In the definition, articulated density is a density that are strategically distributed across parts of a metropolitan area. So these 3 densities are out of our interest of evaluation. Next, please. So in terms of evaluation questions, it's principally assess the 3 different kinds of density. That is a horizontal, vertical, and articulate density. Next, please. So this slide gives you the context of the project of Maputo and Mumbai. And for Maputo, the project called the Maputo Municipal Development Program 2 supported for the improvement of the urban corridor, of which the length is 3.81 kilometer. And for Mumbai, the bank supported the bank financed 2 corridors. One is northern side and the other one is southern side. And these 3 corridors of the 2 projects are of our evaluation target. Next, please. So to initiate the geospatial impact evaluation, we need to get the data. And then we use the geospatial data, and mainly 3 types of geospatial data. One is about satellite imagery, and then we use both public and commercial data sets. The public means Landsat data, of which spatial resolution is 30 meter. And then we also use the commercial data set, especially for the estimation of the height. We use the AW3D data with a 0.5 meter resolution. And also we use the OpenStreetMap, which is a kind of Wikipedia-like mapping data, through which we can extract the street network or point of interest. Point of interest means sort of objects in the city or any other area, like school locations of schools or hospitals or markets, and these are used for evaluation. And the last one is about digital terrain model. Next, please. So I said about geospatial impact evaluation. For the standard impact evaluation, we need a treatment and comparison, obviously. But that may not be straightforwardly applied to the spatial analysis. We need to a little bit change the norm. So in terms of treatment, you can see the red horizontal line in the middle of this slide. That is the road that was supported by the project. And we call it as a treatment road. And as a continuation or extension of the treatment road, there is a blue road, which is a road that was not supported by the project or any other parties. So we can call it as a comparison road. So given the extension and continuation of the road between treatment and comparison, we can consider that the geographic or social economic characteristic before the project intervention could be similar between these areas. And for the standard impact evaluation, we need a treatment group or comparison group, and instead of that, we have a treatment area and a comparison area. There are areas that will have been influenced by the project. And within the treatment area and comparison area, we need to establish the unit of analysis. And the smallest unit of analysis of the satellite imagery is a pixel. But a pixel is really, really small, and it doesn't provide any meaningful information for the estimation. So we need to aggregate that pixel information to some meaningful size of the spatial data. And we created a grid cell in treatment and comparison area. That are the unit of analysis for our evaluation. Next, please. So I mentioned the 3 types of density, and then let me explain one by one. Starting from the horizontal density. Horizontal density is a process to identify where is the built-up area in the city. And then to identify the built-up area, we conducted a land use classification with supervised machine learning. And for those who don't know really about supervised machine, let me briefly explain what it is. So you can see the image at the left-hand side. This is a satellite image. And then you can clearly understand where is what. For example, the white box stands for the built-up area. And for example, like water, for the blue area is a water body, and then green area is a forest area or greener area, and then also the barren area. But this kind of understanding is not automatically translated to the computer or image itself. They don't know how to translate this information. So we need to train the computer how to understand this correlation between the image and the land use. So in order to do that, we created labels by manually identifying a built-up water, forest, or barren. We created hundreds of labels, and then that labels was split into training and test data. And by using training data, we let computer analyze the hidden pattern between the land use classification and pixel value. For example, if it's lighter, it can be built up. So then once algorithm is developed, we will test its accuracy by using test data. An algorithm would predict unknown pixel to one of the land use type, which can be compared with the test data true value. And this provides accuracy of this algorithm. Next, please. And this is a result. I think it is really okay. For Maputo, we have over 80% of accuracy. For Mumbai, we have over 96% of accuracy. So with this one, we can identify where is the built-up area. So that provides us for the horizontal density estimation. Next, please. And for the vertical density, it is not common, or it is not typical, or it is not usually doable to estimate the height of the built-up area through static satellite image. But we try to use a cutting-edge method called a multi-view photogrammetry. We use a number of satellite images from different angles. With this, we can identify the very accurate the height of the land surface. And we have partnered with the NTT Data Corporation, which is a Japanese tech firm. And this process provided us with a very low error rate of the height estimation within the 0.3 meters, both for Maputo and Mumbai. Next, please. And for the third density type, which is articulate density, is try to capture a red hot spot around the observed units. If you look at the image down here, there is an articulated density and a non-articulated density. And for the articulated density, you can clearly understand where is where the concentration of the taller buildings along the corridor, which we call it spatial clustering. In other words, there's a kind of statistical similarities of the higher values of the height around the observed unit. And that statistical similarity is identified through using local Moran's eye, which is proposed by Anselin. And for example, like non-articulate density, you will never see any kind of pattern of the height or of the data, so that there is no spatial clustering of local Moran's eye for the non-articulate density. Next, please. So I've explained the three types of densities, and in order to build a model, we need to have a control variables to better define our model. And our variables are mainly from the distance to urban amenities. And then we get the data from OpenStreetMap, which are street network and point of interest. And then we implemented nearest neighbor analysis. And nearest neighbor analysis is to calculate the shortest distance from grid cell to some object. So the origin of the nearest neighbor analysis is a grid cell, and the destination of the neighbor analysis is the object of urban amenities. An object of urban amenities that we used are streets, intersection, economic hub, financial hub, or whatever. And then you can visually imagine how the distance matters between the cells from the cell to the destination. Next, please. And one more important point of the impact evaluation on the spatial analysis is about spatial autocorrelation. The basic assumption of the standard difference in differences, which is one of the coarse experimental method, is that the outcome of the variable is independently applied, so that there is no correlation between the variables. But for the spatial analysis, the same cannot be said. For example, if you look at the left-hand side map, there is a kind of the correlation of the numbers. You can imagine your decision on the location of the housing when you buy it. Your decision is not only influenced by your disposable income, but your decision will be influenced by the environment around the neighborhood. So your decision is obviously influenced by some other instrument. So that is a spatial autocorrelation. And then spatial autocorrelation can be examined by using the Moran's eye, which is a kind of standard econometric method. And the graph in the middle showed that the data we have is a spatial autocorrelation. So if there is a spatial autocorrelation, it is a problem to apply standard difference in difference. It violates the assumption. So to some extent, we need to regularize the impact of the spatial autocorrelation to understand the net impact of the project intervention. And we introduced a spatial lag operator. Specifically, we applied the spatial to stage least squares model for our estimation. Next, please. So in terms of the results, let me quickly go through the results. For Maputo, the horizontal density in the treatment area increased as opposed to the comparison area. You can see the map that there are a number of the units in the red area are colored as green. That is a positive change to the built-up area. But on the other hand, for the vertical density, the treatment area did not have the major change as opposed to the comparison area. Next, please. And with regard to the articulate density, it shows a similar pattern of the previous maps. Horizontal clustering increased, and you can see the number of the pink area in the red circled area. But for the vertical clustering, although it's not statistically significant, the descriptive statistics show that the comparison area has a higher growth of the vertical clustering. Next, please. And one more important point is how the spatial clustering relates to the distance from the road. And this graph shows the relative position of the grid cell as opposed to the road. And in the center of the graph, this is the location of the road. You can see the text of the road. And location of each cell was encoded by distance and angle from the road. You can see 250 meter till 1000 meter, which is a distance from the road to the grid cell. And also you can see north, south, east, west, which shows the angle from the road to the grid. So you can see there is a coloring, and the red means a new clustering after intervention, and green means the clustering exists before and after, and then blue means the clustering lost after intervention. So and this polar graph shows the horizontal clustering of both treatment and comparison area. If you look at the treatment area, there is a number of the concentration of the red dot around 250 meter to 300 meter. And also the 750 meter to 1000 meter. On the other hand, there's not such a concentration of the red area in that comparison area, which are relatively randomly assigned. And if you can translate this information into the line graph at the right-hand side, you can see the big hike of the treatment area, which is in 200 meter to 300 meter. So this clearly shows that the project was catalytic to introduce a new built-up area along the corridor. That means the project was supportive to infill development, where the land had been underutilized. And then after the project, the underutilized land was well used for the built-up area, for the better productivity of the land. Next, please. But the same cannot be said for the vertical articulation. The treatment area has a relatively small number of the new clustering, and then there's no clear pattern of distance. And also and by comparing to the comparison area, it's clearly shown the differences. And if you look at the line graph, the treatment area underperformed as opposed to the comparison area. Next, please. So with regard to the result of Mumbai, for the horizontal density, there was not a positive impact of the treatment area as opposed to the comparison area. And in vertical density, we didn't have any statistically significant results. Next, please. And at articulate density, there is a mix for the horizontal clustering. And then for the vertical one, this is also not statistically significant because of the huge variation of the height of the buildings. But the distance from the road for the right-hand side image, there is a very irregular pattern of the clustering. Next, please. So that is also confirmed by these polar graphs. There's no clear pattern of both horizontal and vertical clustering. And so that it clearly showed that the road was not catalytic to induce the development both horizontal and vertical. Next, please. And just to check the validity of our analysis as opposed to the globally known articulated corridors, which are Virginia in the US, which is called the Rosalind-Ballston Corridor, which is a famous TOD project, and also the Bogota, Colombia, Transmillennium BRT trunk lines. And the pattern of vertical clustering is clearly different between these two. For example, like Maputo, you can see the bottom bar chart that is showing the upward trend if you go further away from the road. So that means there's no clustering effect of the vertical, of the building height along the corridor. And a similar pattern can also be observed in Mumbai. On the other hand, for the Virginia and Bogota, the trend is quite different. If you go further away from the road, the vertical clustering is much less. So that means that the road is clearly a medium to attract the construction of buildings. This is because the city government has introduced a better land use plan to integrate the higher density of the built-up area. So these four graphs clearly show the importance of the integration of land use planning and land development. Next, please. So as a conclusion, so we just demonstrated how the geospatial impact evaluation could be doable. And that was also supported by machine learning in order to understand the effect between the land use planning and the urban transport project that really contributed to the managing urban spatial growth evaluation. Next, please. And for the Maputo case, it clearly demonstrated infill development effect along the corridor, but the vertical densification is not like that. And for Mumbai, we cannot get the nicer articulation of the density along the corridor. The third one is, next please, is that in order to, the constraints of this impact were a lack of land administration data, for example, like cadastre data, or lack of the understanding of the land market, and also the limited integrated land use planning and urban transport, such as through flexible zoning or floor area ratio, or the introduction of the transit-oriented development. Next, please. So as a conclusion, it is important for the urban transport project to consider beyond the mobility outcome, and then they need to look at how the urban transport project could shape the city structure in terms of density. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hiro, for great presentation, and thanks again to Victor and Malena for their presentation. And while you were talking, actually, a lot of questions already came in from participants. Great to see this engagement. And so I think the first question actually is addressed to Victor and Malena. And Victor and Malena, so Tomo is asking, and you can see that also in the Q&A box from Tomo, the question: development of roads and transport service will have great impact on city growth, but how do you factor in other important issues as land use zoning, existing crime rates, demographic data, ethnicity, income levels into the analysis? So Victor and Malena, if you, one of you would like to address that, please.
We cannot hear you, Victor.
Okay. Do you want me to start, Malena? May I start?
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, so the challenge of carrying out an evaluation such as the one that we have undertaken is to develop a framework that is robust and consistent and is narrow enough to be manageable. So there were many trade-offs that had to be made in the way that we structured the evaluation. And I presented the framework to show you what we considered in the context of the evaluation. We do not consider the factors that you mentioned. They are clearly important, but we chose the ones that are structural and the ones that the bank is able to manage in a more direct way. So land administration projects are is a very clear product. It is a necessary input for land markets, support for land use planning as well. Clearly, the issue of crime and violence is of huge importance, but it would be very, very challenging to do an evaluation on urban growth, considering those social factors. We do look at urban upgrading, and maybe Malena can talk a little bit about that. She did some very detailed work in Maputo. So we do look, we do take into consideration the issue of informal growth, which is the most important way that cities grow in our portfolio. But yeah, we don't consider in an isolated way the factors that you mentioned. Malena, would you like to say anything about the?
No, it's we, as Victor say, we had to take some choices, and we do look at the land use zoning, but we do not look at crime rates and demographic and ethnicity, and clearly when looking at urban upgrading, we naturally look at income level.
But it's a great question. Thank you very much.
So.
Thank you very much. And then we have another question for Hero, actually. So from Albert Capilli, suggestions, where do you get such maps? How much does it cost, and to what extent or level of disaggregation? That would be for Hero, please.
Yeah, for analysis, we need a very higher resolution of the data, because our interest of the area was very local area, so that we used a commercial data set, which we purchased from the service provider. But for India case, because of the area was a little larger than the Maputo, we could also use a public data set, which is 30-meter spatial resolution. And that is openly available through whatever means. For example, the most famous one is the Google Earth Engine provides the free open satellite imagery without any charge.
Thank you, Hero. And then is another question actually from Albert Capilli on the explanatory variable. What does it mean if someone is near urban landmark? What does it mean if I go farther?
Yeah, so we use a number. We experimented a number of the variables, like distance to the airport, like distance to the hospitals, and then someone wants to live closer to one of the variables, and someone doesn't want to be, doesn't want to live in closer to that. So we just focus and select the more reasonable variables, and we drop the number of variables from the original data set. So it really depends on the analysis.
Great, thank you. And then to Victor and, okay, sorry, there was, lost just a question. And so there was another question then for Hero. This is from Maricel Solatve of the Philippines. Can you please explain how the two-stage least squares and the use of lag correct the spatial autocorrelation? Thank you.
I think it's a really technically detailed. So I don't think there's a attention quite a detail about that, but basically it's a kind of the similar understanding of applying the instrumental variable IV impact evaluation, and then the spatial indicators are used as a IV to regularize the impact of the spatial autocorrelation. If you want to talk about a little bit more, maybe we can talk offline. You can drop an email to me.
Thank you very much. And I think actually we have the answer to 5 questions, and there's one more for Hero in the box. And you can see, Hero, this is about the GIs can be viewed as similar to RCTs as they assign treatment and control groups. So a question from Yon Son. And she says that the GI project data not only corresponds to the geographic location, but also to the timing of project implementation, may be challenging. And then Is it feasible to expect MDBs to routinely map the intervention sites, and what approaches can be used that have adequate program pre and post treatment?
Yeah, that is the one of the most challenging issue for us to identify the projects. Actually, there is no systematic way in the bank to get the exact location of the project before and after. Actually, as Victor mentioned in his slide, the advancement of the mobile technology allows us to get exact location of our interventions. For example, there is a couple of new initiatives in the World Bank to get a systematic location of the sub-project level intervention. So, but in our evaluation, we try to get information from the paper or PDF-based map, and then we need to georeference it to get a spatial data. So it's a kind of the common constraint at this moment. I don't know if Victor or Malena wants to add anything for the location information.
Thank you, Hiro. Yes, I think, I think that the question can be turned around a little bit. How can MDBs not afford to do this rather than it is of critical importance. And in 2020, it's inexcusable that we don't do this. Maybe we can go back in the past and say it was difficult and there was no technology. Now there's no excuse. So I think going forward, as Hiro said, there's open sourceware technologies out of Harvard that the bank is using, something called GEMS and other internally driven platforms. But I think it's the other way around. We cannot afford not to do it anymore. Before we had an excuse, now we don't. Thanks.
And if I may say, yes, just to add, I mean, I think it is a missed opportunity because, there's a lot of development after one built a road and just to be able to attribute that to some investments of multilaterals. And this is an opportunity to capitalize on that and to show what has been the contribution.
Thank you, Maria Elena. And there's actually one more question that came in, and I think actually you already, for Victor and Malena, and I think you already addressed also in part of your earlier response, but just if you have anything to add to that question, what are the approaches to ensure that social safeguard issues in urban planning are adequately appreciated and addressed in project design and implementation? And if you had anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think social safeguards in urban development are very important, and I think that in the context of this evaluation, land is the most is the source of the greatest concern in social safeguards, especially when it relates to the relocation of slum dwellers. So one of the things that we in this evaluation, we are looking at both greenfield and brownfield redevelopment, and the idea is how to minimize the disruption on the poor by ensuring that you're preempting growth through preventative approaches to urban growth, and that I think is the major dimension that we look at in the evaluation. Malena, would you like to pitch in on this?
No, I think it's responded.
Great,
There's another question.
No, thanks very much for a rich discussion. Unfortunately, we got the signal, we have to move on to the next presentation.
Perfect. No, we're looking forward to looking at Kabul. Kabul is a great case, and we're very eager to listen to it.
Thanks for the teaser, Victor, and thanks again for your interventions. And we are going now to the Kabul presentation. And we will now turn to Yonggun Wang and Swati Sachdeva for their case study presentation on the impact of urban upgrading in Kabul, Afghanistan. And if some background on Yong, he is a senior economist in the World Bank South Asia Urban Unit. He's currently the task team leader of Afghanistan Urban Lending Project. He's also leading the Global Smart City Partnership Program and the Smart Cities Knowledge Silo Breaker Community of Practice. His work programs have spanned a range of developing countries, in total 30 countries in all regions. And Swati is a senior urban development consultant in the World Bank Urban Resilience and Land Global Practice. She has over 12 years of experience in sustainable urban development, disaster risk management and climate change in 18 cities in Africa, South Asia, East Asia, and Caribbean, including in 4 FCV countries. And most recently, she led geospatial analytical work, for example, to target most vulnerable households for COVID-19 recovery support. Without further ado, handing over to Hyung and Swati for your session, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good morning and good evening. My name is Hyung-gun Wang. Peter kindly introduced me. In this presentation, Swati and I will present on impact of urban upgrading on private investment in property, in particular in Kabul city in Afghanistan. Next slide. So I'll give you a general introduction and then Swati will give you main presentations. So geospatial data can be an important tool to evaluate the impact of urban upgrading on kind of horizontal or vertical city growth, basically the built-up areas, also the building height. This will be really critical for data restricted or conflict affected areas like the Kabul. So next slide. So our World Bank supported the Kabul municipality from 2002. The emergency infrastructure reconstruction project is kind of the setting the stage, the first engagement of the World Bank in urban sector, in particular in Kabul municipality. From 2004, World Bank launched Kabul Urban Reconstruction Project, CUP. This is the kind of a modern infrastructure upgrading project first implemented in Kabul, in Afghanistan. It is supporting upgrading small-scale neighborhood infrastructures like road and drainage in the both formal and informal areas. The same project concept was adopted in Kabul Municipal Development Program, KMDP, from 2014. The main kind of, for the empirical economist point of view, both COP and then KMDP adopted the same project concept of upgrading small-scale municipal infrastructure investment. And one more thing is the selection of a site was determined by communities. And then the sequence of investment, it depends on the preparation of various bidding documents. And then as you can see in the table, the project started from 2004 through the COP, continued until, it will continue until next June, June 2021. So you have almost 16 years of same types of public intervention investment, upgrading neighborhood municipal infrastructures. And then Swati created different geospatial data in different time points and analyzed impact of those World Bank's municipal infrastructure investment on impact on private sectors on their properties. I think it will provide a very rich experience of, we can also, in the spatial analysis, you can identify how this randomized selection of site locations can generate different impact on property investment by the private sectors in different time point. Because we have a 16 years of time horizon, it provides a rich analytical experiment, basically. I think it's the main essence of our World Bank project, but also for the empirical economist point of view, also the impact evaluator point of view, it will provide very rich kind of data to do various kind of spatial analysis, also experiment. Next slide. So one more, can you click the button one more time? Yeah, all the way until end. Yes, thank you. Oh, you went through too much. Oh, good. So this CUP, the Kabul Urban Reconstruction Project, we started from 2004. $34 million. Main component is component A, area upgrading in Kabul municipality. Basically upgrading small-scale municipal infrastructure like road, street, drainage, and others. Next slide. You can click all the way down. Yeah, thank you. And then Kabul Municipal Development Program, KMDP, is basically sequel of the COP. Same project objective. The total project amount is $110 million. Component A, infrastructure upgrading program. The budget is about more than $90 million. Basically, all of the money is mainly focusing on infrastructure upgrading. The current result is that KMDP from 2014 benefited 1.3 million people in Kabul municipalities. It upgraded 2,800 hectares and upgraded about 600 kilometers of community road and more than 700 kilometers of the community drains. Also, it generated over 3 million days of the short-term improvement in Kabul municipalities. So this kind of a nutshell of the general introduction. And then Swati will give the main presentation of the kind of volumetric spatial analysis and then impact evaluation in different locations. So Swati, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyung. Good morning, good evening to everyone from where you're attending. I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to be very quick. Can you go back to the last slide? So I don't know how many of you are aware about Kabul. You know, there are a lot of images that you might have seen over the media, but Kabul, like any other city, is a rapidly growing city. It is growing at 4.6% annually. I don't know why that keeps happening. It is a city which is a host city that's hosting a lot of returnees and IDPs over the years after the war. It's a city that, being a capital city, it's host to 40% of economic activities. And it's also a city that's sprawling. Because of the rapid population and the influx of the forcibly displaced, the city has grown quite a lot over the years and has a proliferation of informal settlements. 70% of the city is informally developed, and those people are living with inadequate access to services, and city is unable to cope with the access to services. And this is where CURP and KMDP that Hyung introduced, those projects came into picture after the war, where bank helped upgrade, both formal as well as informal neighborhoods. There was a 70-30 ratio. We looked at 70% informal so that we are, maintaining a good percentage, as that's the majority of settlements. So as for the context, you are looking at an active conflict zone. And I think this is something that we have to keep in background, right? This is an FCV country. This is in the middle of a conflict. And this has, although it's rapidly growing, it does have a huge influx of these IDPs and returnees, which may be a temporary population, which may return somewhere else. So there is this influx. There is 70% living in informal, as I already said. And lastly, the focus of this session, as we are looking at geospatial analysis, is there a data constraint? Unlike any traditional, city where we can go and conduct surveys or we have plenty of data to procure, in Kabul, most of the data is outdated. Even the satellite imageries are data that you can find, and a lot of the data is incomplete, and the regular methods of data collection cannot be used. Next slide. So that's why we wanted to figure out this 3,000 hectares that bank has already upgraded in the past decade. What was the impact of that? And quantitatively, really look at, because we had a beneficiary survey at the end of CURP project, which led us to believe there were better livability in, intangible benefits to the direct and indirect beneficiaries. But in terms of volumetric change, we did not know how it led to the urban growth, especially horizontal and the vertical growth. So next slide. So looking at the hypothesis, we presumed that urban upgrading is a key development tool, as we know, to instigate densification, to improve the access to basic services and livability, which we already know, and to stimulate housing supply and the rental market. Next slide. So the idea was to look at, we focused on starting with the small study area. It's around 616 hectares. It's in southeast of Kabul. And we picked up the site because it had gozars, as they call it in Kabul, which are basically residential communities that can range from 100 to 1,000 houses. It had gozars that were upgraded as back as KERP projects. So starting from 2008 until, so by different colors, you can see gozars that were upgraded in different years. So you get a range from 2008 to 2017. Next slide. And in terms of methodology, we used both, using 3D data. So we used LiDAR data, which is basically light detection and ranging method. It's a point cloud data that gives you XYZ coordinates, and it's very useful to measure the volumetric change of the built-up areas. But we also use the 2D maps. We also use the satellite imageries of 3 years, 2010, 14, and 18. Similar with the LiDAR data, 10, 14, and 18. To map the change in the land utilization, this horizontal, the growth that we're talking about, how did it grow horizontally as well? Was there a change in the open spaces? Was there a change in the layout of the land? And then we used both of these data sets to quantify the private investment that might have come in these select upgraded gozars, considering that there will be a lot attributed to the market factors as well. And so benchmarking it against the gozars that were either recently upgraded or what was the volumetric change in the gozars before upgrading as against to after the upgrading, and did we see any difference in that? Next slide. So as you can see, this is a sample gozar under KERP that was upgraded roughly between 2008 to 11. And on the left-hand side, you can see the gray is the volume that existed in 2010, right? So 2 years or, roughly the year of upgrading. And pink is 2014. So roughly 3 years after the upgrading, you can already see that there was a lot of difference in the volume, in the built-up volume. Now these are exaggerated to a factor of 5, so that's not the exact volumes that you see. But to visualize, you can see a lot of growth over the built-up volumes. You can see additional new structures that have come up. And on the right side, you see the gray part, which is 2014, and green is 2018. And again, you can see quite a lot of volumetric change that was happening in these upgraded gozars. Next slide. So this is another gozar that's from the KMDP, which was upgraded in 2014. So you can see the difference. The gray is the 2010, pink is 2014, and green is 2018. So you can say, pink was basically just 1 year after the upgrading. So that would not have been probably because of the upgrading, but for 18, you can definitely see 5 years from the upgrading of how the volume has changed. Now, this is also backed up with the anecdotal evidence. The project team has collected quite a lot of data as a baseline data before, starting any upgrading for any of those neighborhoods. And they do document, we'll see this down the slides, that a lot of people have just started on their own. Either they knocked down their houses, to rebuild it, or they incrementally retrofit it. And this is not just happening, after the upgrading is complete, but, sometimes the moment they realize their guzar is selected as one of the upgrading guzars, and there's some sort of sense of security that comes along with it, they would be borrowing money from somewhere or starting taking up a micro loan or something to incrementally retrofit the houses. Now, the other incentive for this is, as I said, there is an influx of forcibly displaced. This is also seen as a secondary source of rental income for them, right? So adding a floor or adding a room to the existing structures have let them, have this extra rental income that can come by hosting a returnee family, for example. Next slide. So in terms of quantifying this, we looked at how much public investment, we have put into each of these guzars through upgrading, and what that led to. So we did realize that there was almost a 6.4% annual increase in the private investments in land, housing, and real estate. Next slide. And this is just to show you in a tabular format of like how we try to benchmark it against, upgrade the guzars that were upgraded recently, or what happened before upgrading, to account for the market factors, just a real estate boom or any of that might have been leading to the private investment. Next slide. And what that helped us quantify is coming out to this back of the envelope calculations to say every $1 that we put in public investment, whether it's a water supply or the tertiary infrastructure that we did in these upgraded guzars, it's sort of leveraged around $32 in private investment. Now that's quite a lot. It can be a case just for Kabul. It can be a case just for upgrading. And certainly it is attributed to market factors as well. But this is quite high in comparison to a study that Bank did somewhere in 1996, where we said for every $1 in public investment, you leverage around $7. So this is almost thrice of that. So this was a good revelation for us. Next slide. The second thing that we looked at is what was the impact on the housing supply. If you can just click on the slide. Yes. So the public investments that we did through this area-wide upgrading, they did lead to quite a lot of increase in the built-up volume, as we saw. And then we tried to quantify the amount of square feet, the cubic meters, as well as the rough housing units, taking an average of 100 square meter house and seeing how much of that, can be translated. Second, we looked at the FSI increase, and then on an average in these select guzars, the FSI increased from 0.87 to 1.4, which clearly indicates that one, there is an appetite for higher build densities, and secondly, yes, it did instigate densification in these neighborhoods. Next slide. And then again, doing a back of the envelope calculations to see overall through the lifetime of these, of both of these projects, and KMDP being closing next year, would have, upgraded 3,648 hectares. That, translate into 119 million of public investments. And that does translate, if taking this as a benchmark, into 40,000 additional units created at no cost to the public sector. Next slide. And the third thing we looked at, of course, is the land utilization. And this is where the satellite imageries and comparing them came into picture. We did see, and this ranges in different guzars, but the open space ratio it was quite a big of a range from 8 to 36%. but it did decrease, indicating that the land started being utilized much more efficiently, because this open space was not really a functional open spaces. It was more of an underutilized spaces. Next. And we realized, if you look at these maps, next slide, sorry. You can click on that, I think. So in this, you can see the change in the built versus the open space. And I have, highlighted few in the circles for you to just visualize how the land was utilized probably better. You can see on the right-hand side, there is a lot of structures that are coming up in this, even, around where the streets, coincide, you can see a lot of differences in the land that was utilized before and after the upgrading. Next slide. Right, and the fourth thing is the project team, which, by the way, is a total local staff, and it's all Afghans in the team, and that's been one of the very good success of the project. There is no international staff in the project team, the implementation team on that end. So what they did is they collected real estate values before the upgrading of each of these guzars, and they also documented the rental values that might have been got, and we can see there was almost a 36% increase in the real estate values after the upgrading. They also mentioned how many returnee families were accommodated in these guzars, what was the rental market change. And it's clear that, there is a high potential for the city to take advantage of these betterment levies from these neighborhoods. Next slide. And lastly, obviously looking at that how this project has improved livability, connectivity, health, and opportunities for this local small business. If you can click on that slide. So it did improved mobility to quite a lot. It had a significant effect on the smaller businesses, and you'll see in the photographs on the next slide just that a lot of small businesses like bakeries or whatever had started popping up after the upgrading. Definitely it became a lot more healthier environment just because of the reduction. If anyone knows about the air pollution in Kabul, it became, with the paving of the roads, it became a lot of, it was healthier, it was safer to walk. There was a lot of drainage issues before the upgrading in these informal settlements, and that kind of also improved. So this, yes, next slide. So this photograph basically is to show you what I was saying. From the left-hand side, you can see the mud structured, clustered. This is how most of the houses were in these informal settlements. Although this house may have been retrofitted a little bit. But on the right side, you can see the new construction, where people have either knocked down the houses to rebuild, 3 stories or something, to go higher, or they have incrementally added a floor or a room to accommodate more of the renters. Next slide. And these are just a few of the photographs to show how the quality of the neighborhoods in informal settlements has changed over the years. Next slide. So I would just like to end it on this note that, upgrading sometimes is not an interim solution, although it is thought as. It is often a final solution in these informal settlements. It is highly cost effective. It does have a quite big impact on livability, on housing supply, and its economic impacts, both on the livelihoods and businesses, and overall on the citizens, is quite significant. And so, yeah, that's the end. And And yeah, of course, highlighting that in such a context where data is such a constraint, but you still want to map the impact, I think geospatial is a very useful tool to do that from afar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Swati and Yong, for the great presentation. And we have a few minutes left, and we see that there's a question actually from Albert Capilli. He says the images provided changes vertically. Did you look at horizontal changes? Do you think the horizontal is larger, or is it the case in a Kabul that structures are built vertically? If you could respond to this one, either Swati or Yong, please.
Sure.
I think Swati, you may respond. Yes, thank you.
Sure. I think it's both, but probably it's, if we have to compare, because we have cubic meters of vertical, and we did have horizontal as well, but I think vertical is a lot more, if that's what your question is. Yes, they were mostly, but if it depends on the gozar, right? And I have not put maps of all the gozars. So there were some of the gozars which were purely residential. And in those, most often you would see a horizontal growth if the plot boundary allows to do that. But if not, and if they were on a smaller plot of land and were surrounded by houses on the either side, they would have mostly gone vertical. So I think it was case to case basis. Yes, we saw more of the vertical growth in the maps that I just presented, but I think few of the gozars, it was the other way around.
Yeah, this is Hyung. For clarification, our KMDP or COP project is upgrading existing communities. So it's different from the greenfield development. Kabul is notorious for urban sprawling, but urban sprawling happening outside of Kabul municipality boundaries, not inside. So in our project design, we only considering existing community upgrading. So that's why we didn't look at kind of large expansion or large horizontal expansions. Let me stop here.
Great. Thank you very much, Yong and Swati. And fortunately, we are reaching the end of our session today. But I think what would be great is, if each of the presenters might, take one key takeaway from your position, before we wrap up. So maybe Victor, if you wanted to kind of share one key takeaway. Sorry, Victor, I think you're muted.
Malena can start if that's okay.
Sure, yes, please, Maria Elena, please.
Okay, so if I want to take one key takeaway is that to not miss the opportunity to measure the impact of urban growth, and it's very important to be able to understand what has been the contribution and how the cities are changing and what is the effect in different beneficiaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Elena. And Victor, if you want to.
Yes, I think that the key takeaway is that MDBs need to be involved in the issue of managing urban and spatial growth, both within the cities and outside the cities, and we need to be able to, as Malena explained, measure it, but also be a source of knowledge about it. And the only way we're going to do that is if we understand the impact of our project. So we look forward to having a rich discussion based on the evaluation going forward. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Victor. And Hiro, any key takeaway from you, please?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, I think in a practical point of view, the running the evaluation for the spatial with a spatial data is really hard, and it's quite a iterative process, and it needs quite a try and error. And for those who wants to try a sort of the spatial data for this geospatial impact evaluation, I'm happy to help and happy to communicate if you need any information or knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hiro and Hyung. Any key takeaway from you, please?
This is Hyung. As Victor mentioned before, the disrupt technology and new technologies are providing really new opportunities of getting data for the various impact evaluation, also understanding various the patterns of the urbanization. I think we have a unique opportunity to utilizing those disruptive and digital technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hyung and Swati. If you have any key takeaway.
I think everybody has covered it. It's more or less, yeah, the same for disruptive technology. You know, you really leveraging it in a context like an FCV context where you don't have it. I think that was the main takeaway, you know, and to quantitatively look at the impacts and, you know, not just do a qualitative surveys at the end, because that really makes a difference and that really helps with, you know, seeing how actually it helped in the urban growth.
Thank you very much, Swati. Thank you very much again to all the presenters. We actually, a few minutes now, 10:03 here, and we still have 53 participants. So thank you very much also to all the participants for staying with us. And many thanks also to the ADP team, the session producer, Michael Disa, and session director, Araceli Naik. And yes, we are actually, thanks again. And as Victor mentioned, the managing urban spatial growth evaluation expected to coming out in a couple of months. So looking forward to that and yeah, to further discussion. And I'm sure there will be many more things to discuss. And looking forward to the next opportunity. And thank you very much again, everyone. And have a great night or a great morning, wherever you are. All the best and stay well and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.